I'm very curious. How often do you actually get to see each other?
Uh,
Go ahead, Matt.
I don't know. I mean, a couple times a year, I guess, 2 or 3 times a year.
Yeah, we had dinner 6 months ago, I guess, in LA. We
Yeah,
talk over
yeah.
email. I guess I get to see David whenever I'm in New York and whenever he's out here. So yeah, a few times a year in person, certainly. And then we talk. I talk to David on the phone quite a bit. Matt and I communicate via email and also through his wife Linda, who is our architect. So we pass information back and forth that way.
Very good. Let me explain to the people who are watching us. This won't be a Sopranos walk down memory lane. We can do that for hours, but the purpose of this hour that we have is to use the collective knowledge of these amazing men in your own writing during this extended hiatus. And so it's going to be an exploration of their writing process, the ups and downs, and what it's like to be a professional showrunner in this cutthroat business. So why don't we just jump right into it and use our time well?
Where is David?
I'm right here.
I don't see
You're
you.
not on the screen.
Oh, what do
You
I
have to
do?
turn your camera on.
His camera's on.
Yeah.
Hi.
There he is.
Ah,
I'm
there you are.
Michelle.
Oh,
That's so weird. It was on.
There he is, right there.
Hi.
There he is.
Hi.
David, is this the first time, like us, that you've worn an actual shirt in like 3 weeks?
yeah,
Yeah, I've been so nice to be out of pajamas.
yeah.
Still not wearing pants.
David, could you hear what we were talking about?
What?
Were you able to hear us before you jumped in visually?
Yes, I was.
Okay, very good. I want to begin by asking the three of you, not when you're writing material that people bring to you, but when you're writing your own original material, do you begin with an arena, with a story or a character, or does it bounce around?
Wow.
I think it varies. For me, some original things I've written have started with character. I think I want to go to character first. Ideas, dialogue, and then sometimes a story or a situation will take shape from there. Again, it does vary. I mean, sometimes I've thought of stories and then worked backwards. Well, how would you express this in terms of character? But I think the most satisfying version of it for me is starting with a character. What do you guys think?
I think it's the same for me. If you are lucky enough to get a show in front of people's eyes, they start asking all the time how you came up with the idea, and you literally start going further and further and back in your life, and you're like, well, there was sort of this, and there was that, and there was this, and I mean, getting to the point where where you have enough of something to execute it, you usually need for sure a character. And the story, as always, is the hardest thing. You have like a feeling about what the story should be or something it would be like, at least for me. But there's usually a story about a person and some other person. And then, everything else kind of falls into place.
Did Man Man begin with Don Draper, the period, the world, the arena?
I think it probably began with some concept of Don, although that wasn't his name. It began with sort of, I mean, there's like philosophical things under it. Also, like I kind of wanted to say to I'm Generation X, not that I identify so clearly with what generation I am, but I did want to say to the baby boomers, like, you didn't invent any of this stuff and you had it kind of easy. And that was something philosophically behind it. And I also loved the period and thought it was misrepresented as kind of kitsch. And it's funny because now that the show's out there and it was all about deflating this as an ideal time, people still idealize it. So I don't know that worked, but that was the philosophical part behind it. But what I really wanted to do was write about a guy who was my age at the time when I wrote the script, which was 35, who had a lot of things that were on the list that you would want in your life and was still unfulfilled.
Hey, David, do you remember the day you said where Sopranos was formed?
No, it was kind of a long process. And it all began with my mother. And my wife told me many times that my mother was very funny and I should write about my mother. And then I was working on a show and another writer told me the same thing. And that writer said I should write a story, like an autobiographical thing. And I just didn't think it was going to work, like a TV producer and his mother. I don't know, just didn't think it was going to work. And then somehow or other, the idea came to me to have it be, I thought it should be a tougher guy, harder, tougher than I am. And it came to me that a mafia guy, because it would be Italian and all that. So I started working on it then, and I took it to my agent, and he said, those things don't work. Mob comedy don't work, and forget about it. So I was going to help. I wanted to have Anne Bancroft and Robert De Niro as the mother and son. He said, forget about it, and so I forgot about it. And then later on, I went to a Burlstein Gray, and they wanted to do The Godfather, and I didn't want to do that. But then I thought about this idea I had about the guy and his mother, and I thought, well, maybe that would work because a lot of TV is very female oriented, when, especially family shows. And, that's what happened. But there wasn't a day. I mean,
Oh, that's a great answer.
it would be probably me driving home from that meeting.
That's a very good answer. Thank you, David. For the three of you, many emerging writers are told to write what you know. How much truth is there to that?
I think it certainly makes things easier. The research is a huge component of what we do. And I have to say the things I've already known about when I plunge into writing, it certainly goes down a lot smoother, and you feel like you're on much more secure footing than putting words in the mouth of a nuclear physicist who you're only getting, dialogue off of a page and praying that this sounds legit. I have to say, for me, the thing that got me a lot of notice initially was a script I wrote, ironically, that David didn't like, but ended up hiring me on The Sopranos anyway. The movie I wrote ultimately was titled Brooklyn Rules. That was about me and my two best friends growing up. And it was the easiest thing I had written, and probably reads like that. Because, obviously I know myself and these two guys really well. So the story came out very quickly, the dialogue, certainly the character stuff. But, that was the first thing I ever wrote that was really a pretty clear indication of a unique voice. Not, and again, not to say that it's such a great, unique voice, but at least you read it and you read, okay, the writer, whoever wrote this, knows this intimately. This was a great calling card for me, because at least it identified me as a particular person, and people who read it suddenly, it responded, and I got a lot of initial meetings in my feature career off of that script. So in that sense, just from personal experience, I think that it did a lot better for me than writing an action movie or something. It was much more personal, and I think it's clear when you read it that this came from, somebody's life. Matt, before I go on, who's the third person in the Groucho Alice Cooper thing? Is that Marvin Hamlish?
Yes, it is.
Okay, so you're driving me crazy. All right, it's fuzzy. I got Groucho and Alice Cooper.
Can you believe they were together and they're drinking beer?
That's awesome. That's cool. Anyway, sorry for the digression.
Oh, no, it's the little things that will just bug you all day long.
That's a really good question, Lawrence. A really good question. And I always think that it's Terry answered it so succinctly, but for me, it's usually a response to the fact that people are so far bending over so backwards to make something interesting and to write about a world that they don't know about, when the thing that they know probably is their own behavior and human behavior. So for someone like me who was, it was frustrating to people. I was never in advertising. My father was not in advertising. I wasn't born when the show came out. there was something to that. I was worried myself when I got to The Sopranos. What did I know about the mafia except for what I'd seen on The Sopranos and a bunch of movies. And I'm from Hancock Park, and my dad's a doctor. Like, there's like nothing, that world of privilege is not related to any of that. But I did understand the human dynamics. And I think when they say write what for me that means, if you're in a room with David and Terry and you're talking about being embarrassed, right? The times in your life when you've been embarrassed, or the times in your life you've been dominated, or you've dominated someone, or you've owed somebody money. Those are the kinds of things that I think you need to know about. But could you write a story about someone like you, or someone who has behavior that from your family or what else it is, and set it in medieval times or fantasy times or whatever? You can't. So just stay away from I think a lot of times people just don't see that the gold that they have in their own life. And when you talk to writers, especially beginning writers, and they were like, well, my mom used to do this, blah, blah, blah. And you're like, why don't you use that? And, Lawrence, you've had this conversation with people a million times. You're like, why didn't you use that? That's great. And they're like, but, in the movies, and you're like, no, write what you know. That's what that refers to me.
Terence, how did you get the voice of Nucky, which is, I imagine, so not in your universe?
That was a little more challenging. I think the most challenging aspect of that was that it was a period piece from a period long ago. So I know I needed it not to sound like cliche 1920s and having people say 23 skidoo and all that stuff every other, it's like, I was very impressed that you didn't hear the word groovy on Mad Men a lot, if at all. Groovy was probably like our forget about it on Sopranos. You never heard anybody say that. But if you
made a big deal out of it when we did it, actually. We made a big deal out of it. I put it in the mouth of the most awkward, out of place, middle-aged person I could, because that's who heard it, said it first.
Perfect. So yeah, I mean, that's that was sort of the challenge. I mean, in terms of Nucky's character, I mean, again, he was ultimately a mob boss of sorts. He started out as a corrupt politician who got in way over his head. So that stuff I felt I understood, and the gangster dynamic I understood, and the family dynamics I understood. For me, the challenge was to make it sound like the 1920s, but not a cliche version of the 1920s. So we really had a rule to very lightly pepper the dialogue with 1920isms, just use them as sparingly as possible. There were pop culture references, of course, but people spoke a little more formally back then, of course. They didn't use as many contractions. And I read a lot of novels of the period, a lot of newspapers of the period. I had to be careful about watching movies that depicted the period, because those movies were an idealized version of what the reality was. So I really tried to read as much contemporary material as I could, and slowly got the hang of it, I think. I hope I did.
In the foundation, we have an early draft of Lawrence Kasdan's for Empire Strikes Back. And in the margins, he has her handwritten, "Find a voice for Yoda."
That's great.
Yeah. So, David, I ask you, how did you find the voice of Tony Soprano?
Oh, to be honest with you, it's sort of my voice. My father, I guess, really. Tony said a lot of things that my father would say, or thought in the same ways that my father would think. I guess that's where it came from. And I have to be also confess, and probably some from movies. I came from New Jersey. There was I had distant cousins, or not even that distant, who were connected, and it came very natural to me. I can't explain why. I really can't. It was my father, I think. The way Tony used to get angry at AJ, for example, when he said, one time AJ dropped the lasagna, and Tony said, "This is my male heir." I'm gonna get a vasectomy and this is my male hair. That's the kind of my father used to say.
You know, all of you have mentioned research in passing. How important is research in what you're writing, and can research be a trap sometimes?
I heard about this, who's that guy, Sidney Sheldon? Remember that great, I mean, that novelist sold zillions of copies? He used to write the novel and then have somebody do the research. So I always thought that was pretty interesting.
It can definitely be a road to procrastination, as can anything. As can, you know,
For sure.
as can two pennies and a paperclip. But it really, you know, you can make a decision about it. Sometimes you don't care, and it's just what it is. And sometimes you find story in the research. It's so, what, you know, you can hide in it, like, as you were saying, you can get so deep into it where it just becomes, I can usually tell when I read a script or see a movie where someone has gone overboard on the research and they just have to put something in there, or there's too voluminous a discussion about some tiny thing that really doesn't relate to anything, even if the person's an expert. But I mean, we had a whole team of people, because I basically sort of threw down a gauntlet, and the audience was alive. A lot of the audience was alive during the period of the show, and then the internet kind of became more so during the show, which is hard for people to remember. But you know, the first season of Mad Men, we had the Nixon Kennedy election, and I remember someone coming up to me and saying, like, "Well, who wins the election?" And I was like, I really got you pretty tense here, huh? You know, I don't. It's like going to watching Titanic and saying, "Oh my God, the ship went down." But I said, well, Kennedy wins the election, and and they're like, "Well, I mean, I knew Nixon was the president too. I just didn't know when he won it." And I was like, "Okay, that's fair." And then by the time we moved on, people were so ahead of the fact that the show, I made a decision that the show would be moving in time. The show could have happened in some, you know, it's some calendarless void of just happening every day. The whole life of the show, 8 seasons, could have been in just the 60s. But I felt like I wanted to commit to the calendar and pick a day actually where the episodes were taking place, so I could, I don't even know, at a certain point it becomes insane. Know the weather, know what people were wearing, know this. It's just a thing. There's so many other things to worry about that I was like, now I know what's real. It rained that day. No, I'm going to go to the meeting and they're going to say, what are they wearing? And I'm like, it was raining, and it rained for part of the day. And the cinematographer knows it, and everybody knows it. And that research was essential. But when we were actually coming up with the story, you know, sometimes you just find out crazy stuff that went on. You know, we did this episode where they had blackface at the country club because it was a story that I'd heard about. And everyone's like, you're going to get it for that. And it turned out that in Philadelphia, they had a parade in 1963 with surprise, surprise, the police force. Sorry, Philadelphia. In blackface. This was not something that had gone away. And obviously we now know it's like, it's so weird to think historically what's going on at the moment, and how so much of what the 60s was about was erasing the attitudes that are just, obviously they weren't erased, that are so prevalent right now. And so I would dig up things about the John Birch Society, thinking like, oh, there were these crazy people who sympathized with the, you know, we're so afraid of communists and sympathize with the Nazi parties. We should put some, and we should put them into the story somewhere. And now it doesn't seem like such a zoo animal as it did then. But the research would give us a lot of stories, from things as small as someone not being able to get home because they didn't have a subway token or enough postage or whatever, just things you forget about.
But those things can become the whole story, you know.
Yeah.
It all takes off from there. The subway tokens.
Mhm.
I miss subway tokens. We really have a lot of unfinished business, and so I want to sort of move along the conversation. Can you tell me about your daily writing process? You know, you're working on something original, or you're working on an assignment, or you've got a big project. It's a random Thursday. What's that day like?
For me, I guess it depends at what stage of the project I'm at. It's either researching, outlining, or actually writing the script. My writing day starts pretty early. I get up at 7 o'clock or so. Well, these days, I don't even know what time, but normally, normally it's like 6:30. Coffee, get the kids off to school, return some emails, and then jump in by 8 o'clock or so. And again, depending on what stage I'm at, that's what's getting my attention. If it's a writing day where I'm actually writing, I just pick up where I left off and try to write, and I get a good 7 or 8 minutes in before I have to look up something on YouTube and fall down a rabbit hole looking at Rodney Dangerfield on the Ed Sullivan Show. Then I go back to whatever it is I'm writing, and another 4 minutes, and that goes on for hours. So, what about you guys?
Very undisciplined. I find it really hard to stay in the chair. I find it hard to get into the chair. Just really undisciplined. I write when I can, or when I feel like it, or something like that. I don't really know.
Well, wait a minute. When you have Lawrence, this is you have to point this out. When you are running a show, there is no option. Terry is the only person I know. Terry is the only person I know who could actually do more than one thing while he's running a show. But for the rest of us, your ass is in the chair every day, and it's on your mind all the time when you're running a show.
It wasn't like that for me. It wasn't like that for me. I was editing and doing all the stupid merchandising and all that crap.
But not in the 3 or 4 months before we started shooting. When you were getting scripts in shape, I don't know. It seemed to me maybe it was.
It was.
You did rewriting every
Maybe
weekend.
I invented those problems. I don't know. I know. But I just will say I don't think I'm a very disciplined writer, and I will invent things to take my attention away.
Yeah,
But isn't that always part of the process, though? I mean, ultimately, if it gets done, then all the procrastination that went into it is kind of part of it. I made a joke about falling down a YouTube rabbit hole, but sometimes that stuff ends up in the script. And I find, I don't know if you guys have found this too,
saying about whatever he said, the rain or the pennies or something.
yeah.
Uh-huh.
You can never tell.
Yeah.
Every show, someone when the showrunner when the person who's running the show is running their first show, every show has an episode the first season where they have a deadline and they can't think of anything. They could be a doctor, they could be a bus driver, whatever the character is. It just happens, even with a great writer's room and everything, that you never thought that, I used to joke about at the production meeting, I was like, I became a writer so I didn't have to go to meetings, but I would actually look forward to them because there were times when I wasn't writing.
Right.
I have made peace with the process now because all of these people, and I can say this about David and Terry, at least, we all write much faster than you'd think was possible, than you think was possible, because there's a freight train coming at you and it has to get done, and there's a deadline. On the other hand, when you're
that's why I liked the producing aspect of it. Somebody come in, I'd be writing, what posters? Don't ask me about the posters now, I'm writing. Well, come on in, let's see, what do they got? And we keep them there for 4 hours,
I would make the writer's room pick someplace to eat lunch, and before I came in, someone would, or before I walked into the room, I was usually there before they were, or if I'd worked late after. But and I would always order what, at least on Mad Men, what Andre Jacques Maton would have, because I couldn't make that decision, and I really was occupied with the script, not in a dreamy way, just in a terrified way. But when the writing process, I always wanted to be one of those people who got up every day and no matter what, sat down at the thing. And it's not really like that. I write when I don't have a show. I write with the urgency of, it's hard to explain. It really is inspiration driven, and it's about laziness and things like that. And you're just punishing yourself the whole time. But I have to say, when the show is on, I would reliably write every night when the writers went home from 7 p.m. till like 1 or 2 in the morning. And then I would write on Sunday afternoon. And it was very painful. And you got into the tricks of like, I'm going to make myself do this. But in the end, we all know like there's such an advantage to writing stuff that's going to get shot, that it actually, even with all the pressure, it's pretty exciting. And when it's going to get shot, it just has a different feeling. You don't have to sell it. You don't have to convince an actor to be in it. You don't have to do anything. You just anything that you can't figure out how to write, you're going to get to go talk to the production designer and the costume designer and the director. So, but I wish I had that. I would pass along one piece of advice that I got before I was on a sitcom, and I've been lucky enough to know Alan Burns, who was one of the creators of the Mary Tyler Moore Show and the Lou Grant Show and the Munsters, actually. And Alan Burns told me early on in my career, I asked him, I was like, when do you write? And he's like, well, it doesn't really matter when I write, but I always like to quit when I'm hot. And I was like, okay, what does that mean? He goes, it means I like to know where I'm going when I sit down again, so I don't have to start cold. And number one, I couldn't believe that a guy who had been writing that much his whole life could ever have a problem getting started. That was scary because I hadn't written much at all yet. But the other thing is, I actually practice that. I still practice it. If I'm going to stop for the night or the day or whatever, I make sure that I have at least something that looks good to sit down, even if it's going to be a week before I get back to it. I really, really recommend that, because it's really hard to reinvent the wheel and it's hard enough to start anyway. But if you just write even the crappy thing that you thought looked good when you were knocking off the time before, it really helps.
Yeah, true. I was going to say before, Stephen Cannell, I worked for Stephen Cannell, got up, and this is a guy who was dyslexic. There was only one assistant who could figure out what his scripts, we type, what his scripts were saying. That's how bad it was. Got up at 5:30 and was done writing by 10 o'clock every day. And I used to think, wow, how does he do that? Well, first you'd have to get up, which, I didn't want to do. But he was producing the show, and then he was producing 3 other shows, and he just had that. He loved it. He couldn't wait. And then he'd rip the thing out of the typewriter and he'd bring it in and read it to you while you're trying to write.
Yeah, well, deadlines help quite a bit. And it was even great. I remember on The Sopranos, I'd be working on a script and I needed more time. And this actually was really helpful. Although it sounds mean. I called David and go, look, I know I told you Friday, I need till Monday. And he would just say, no. Well, I just can't have it Friday. I just can't do it. And we just do this dance every time. And he'd say, no, I need the fucking script. Just do it. And I'd hang up, and it was the same every time. I didn't do it a lot, but you were never going to get a pass. And it always got done. And if he would have said Monday, it wouldn't have gotten done till Monday. But somehow I got it done by Friday because there's a deadline and there's no option. So, that certainly helps you, focus.
Harry protected me and advised me so much when I first started on the show, actually through the entire thing, and I still ask him for advice occasionally about how to do things because he's so good at it. And I said to him, I was like, I'm going to need more time for this. I don't think I'm going to make it. Should I call David? And he goes, all David is going to say is where's my fucking money? What would Tony say? Where's my fucking money? And then the other thing he said, and I said, I think he liked the last one. He said, well, you're only as good as your last envelope.
Yeah.
Very true.
Remember that guy we had, I forget who it was, who wrote a script in 3 days? It was his first script.
Yeah.
We sent him away, and he called me 3 days later and said he was ready to turn it in. I said, really? he said, yeah. I said, oh, don't, take 2 weeks. We talked about 2 weeks. No, I'm done.
Yeah.
I just couldn't believe it.
How was it?
Terrible, just terrible. And
But
but I
then you wrote it in 2
I
days.
knew it was going to happen that way, but I couldn't explain it to him or convince him that it
It's
just.
the same thing with the length. I remember somebody asking me, like, the script is 95 pages, and I was like, it's going to be 65 when they shoot it. You probably can get away with 75 turning in the draft. Well, I can't get everything in less than 95 pages, and they're going to be upset if I cut things out. And I was like, I'm just telling you right now, it can't be longer than 75 pages. And you're doing, I didn't want to say it this way because I didn't know what David was going to say, but I knew that because I've been on staff forever, I was like, no one's going to read a 95-page script for a 1-hour show. That's a feature. But I have to say, Terry, too, I remember saying to you, I was like, I'm so behind. I haven't done anything. I was like, tried to call you because I don't know what to do. And you're like, well, I was at the movies. And it was like, what are you doing at the movies? And you're like, I go to the movies. The first day I get assigned the script, I go to the movies.
Yeah.
I was like, I don't know if you still do that. Do you remember saying that to me?
Yeah, I know I'm not going to do anything for the first couple of days, so I don't beat myself up over it. I've learned early on. I mean, this is why I don't have any hair, because I would sit for the first week pulling what little hair I had out, staring at this blank screen. Oh fuck, I didn't do anything today. And I'd write a line, and I couldn't focus. I can't focus until I start to feel the pressure. So what I finally learned how to do is, okay, for the first couple of days, I know I'm not going to do anything. So I'll go to the movies, I'll go for a walk, I'll play tennis, whatever. And you are thinking about the script. I mean, like I said before, whether or not you know it, it's all part of the work.
Sure.
I mean, all that procrastination it's all bubbling, and I'm thinking about it all the time. At a certain point,
Well, I used to tell myself that all the time. Don't worry about it. It's happening up there.
But it's true.
but it gets
It's
done.
true.
But it always, David, you never missed a deadline. The show got made. It all happened.
But, I'm not. You're
Hold on
the
a second.
person I know.
Let me ask all of you a question.
Really, you just work. I mean,
Yeah.
it's amazing. I have to get, as soon as I get the assignment or whatever, I have to start immediately.
Did it? Let me ask all of you.
It would take me a week. If we had 2 weeks, it would take me a week to write the first 3 scenes, and then 24 hours to write the rest of the script.
Have you guys?
And then I would always try. I was so terrified, especially at the beginning of The Sopranos, about how these drafts would be and how make or break everything was, because it was a serious environment. That I would finish the script and make sure I finished it within 48 hours of when it was due, so that I could read it over again to make sure that I hadn't done something horrible. Because the term paper aspect of like turning something in at the very last second and not getting a chance to reread it or look at it or think about it fresh was very hard for me. So I did that. But I have to say, once I give credit. I don't know how much everybody remembers being on staff. I've probably been on staff the most recently of the 3 of us. And I definitely find it easier to write when it's, when I'm the showrunner. It's just not as scary as, I know, yes, there's a network, there's a studio, there's the audience, what you're thinking about. There's the writer's room, actually, what you're really thinking about, trying to make sure that everything is happening. There's plenty of pressure. There's 10 times the pressure, but nothing compares to having your boss's voice in your head and he or she expectations and the existence of a show that you didn't create there, and everything having to be in that order, and meeting the strictures of the outline. That is the greatest impediment to working that I've found. That is really the thing that kept me from getting everything done right away.
You know what I think part of that is, at least it was for me, maybe it's pretentious. I would say when we were doing The Sopranos, I would say, you know what? The purpose of this is for you to express yourself, for you to be an artist. That's why you're here. So whatever happens, happens. In other words, I didn't feel that way working on other shows. I enjoyed it a great deal, but I didn't feel like, experiment, try this, try that. And I think you do have that when you're running a show. So no matter what you're doing, even if it seems like you're thinking about something stupid, you think, well, Van Gogh, I don't know, the Starry Night. If he did that, you can do this.
I have to thank all of you, because I think the perception from other writers are that you two are like the three of you are like Mount Rushmore. It all comes to you so easily. It all comes to you fully formed. How honest you're being about how ugly your process is, I think, will make many writers feel more confident that they're not crazy too. So thank you for that. Let me ask. Go ahead, Matt.
I was going to say, I mean, I have actually had the process change over my life where I actually do look forward to it more. But there are things that I know, I mean, I really enjoy writing now, but maybe I'm not as good because of it. I don't know. I just have this thing where I'm like, I am in control of all the elements here. I'm writing something that, like David's saying, I'm owning the fact. I mean, David was such a great example of someone expressing themselves and expressing a higher ideal and a big idea often, and respecting the audience was interested in it. Also, talk about writing what you know, just like certain behaviors and like things that no one had really paid attention to. And Terry's life is in that show. My life is in that show. And I'm talking about The Sopranos, and that was all very respected. That the depth of our experience, every writer's experience, was valuable if it had any truth in it or it was related to the story. But I definitely have this thing where sometimes you are blocked or afraid of something because it's going to be so hard. And what you want it to be is so much better. This is not about being a perfectionist. It's not like, oh, I have higher standards than other people. It's literally not knowing how to do it. And one of the great things about TV writing in particular is the social aspect of it, because other writers, sometimes the least experienced ones, believe it or not, can actually help you find a way to do it. And it's not just cheerleading. So when you're back on your own, and you're in the dream world of expressing the artful, basic idea, it can be exhilarating to investigate those parts of things, but it can be really scary, and it can actually keep you from writing.
What is that movie with Alec Guinness? He plays a painter, Gully Jimson. I can't think of the name of the movie. But he would paint, and then he'd look at it when he was done, and he'd say, it's not the vision I had. And I heard that in film school, just in passing. The head of the film school said that as a joke, and I never forgot that. That it won't be the vision you had. When that first burst, the big bang that happens in your head, oh my Christ, what a great thing, just goes, it goes through all kinds of permutations, and it isn't the vision you had. I used to think about that all the time. That was done as a joke in that movie, but I sort of believed it.
But I do think, well, maybe I'm speaking for myself. I have had moments where I've looked especially at like a cut of a show, especially the first season of Mad Men, where I was like emotional in the editing room and said, oh my God, that's what I was trying to say. So I don't feel that way, but we don't write it's a weird part of writing, and we're talking to writers here right now. We don't write. The script is not the finished product. So there's always room for it to be improved by being made real, right?
By other people. By directors.
By other people, absolutely.
Well, I was going to say, how many times you had the happy experience where it's better than what you envisioned? You go on the page, it's not working, and then you turn it over to some great director and an amazing cast, and they go, now it's elevated to the point where that's what I was going for, but I couldn't get it there on the page. But man, this is actually better than what I thought. If you can count on one hand the time that's happened to you, you consider yourself lucky. But it's amazing.
If you have the right actors, it happens all the time.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Right.
Absolutely. Yeah.
It happens every day.
Yeah. It's pretty great.
Let me ask all of you,
Said
for Boardwalk and for Sopranos and Mad Men, is there a pitch that never got made that you would have loved to have done if you had another episode?
We had a storyline involving the death of Arnold Rothstein, who was played by Michael Stuhlbarg, that happened in 1928 in real life, that we couldn't do because we jumped ahead to 1931 in the final season. That killed me because that character just deserved more exploration and a better send-off, and certainly an episode involving his tragic death. And I always thought maybe we could do it in flashback, and it just felt like it didn't work anyway, and I couldn't get to it. And that's the one that got away, because I would like to have seen that character's final days.
Matt or David, you have one that got away?
There was a couple stories that we couldn't figure out how to do that I wanted to do. We just couldn't crack them. You know, they look good, and then we just couldn't make them happen. Sometimes we didn't have the money to make them happen, so the puzzle was, how do we do this cheap? You know, I had written actually versions of. I really wanted to do a story that involved golf, because it was such a huge part of advertising. And golf courses don't seem like they age that much, but it was very expensive to go out and shoot on the golf course, of just somebody having, the account men have to be great golfers, but they always must lose. So they have to. You cannot beat the client. It's not, and the client you will have to do it. It's like in The Color of Money or something. You will have to dump in a believable way. You will have to be so good, and not just like let them look like they're winning. So things like that. What?
Does the client know that? Is that part of the kabuki?
Well, they do, but they're not an idiot. So they have to basically, you have to, I can't, you see, anybody out there, if you figure out how to write this and you can afford to shoot it. I'm giving this idea out there. I heard so many stories about it, and it's so.
Wait a minute, how does it go again? The golfer. Okay, I got it.
Terry's already shot this. There was also a story that we had. There were characters that that I love in the show that we would have stories for, and they would sort of fall out because we had to deal with Dawn or whatever, which was our business and which I loved. But there was a great thing that I'd overheard about it. The Nielsen ratings used to be kept in a paper diary. And we had this idea that Harry Crane found out that his neighbor had one of these. There were only 1,000 diaries. So you could really, with one diary, influence the ratings. And what he would do to get himself invited over to dinner and to have his wife become friends with them. And it basically climaxed with him having a tug of war with the diary with the 9-year-old kid who's filling it out every day. But we had to build another apartment, and it was like 4 other speaking parts at the time. We never got it done. There's a lot of stuff that was left on the floor, I could say, honestly.
Okay. Let me move on, only because time is the enemy here. Many emerging writers are told constantly, find your voice as a writer. Could you gentlemen describe your voice as a writer?
Wow.
The silence is deafening.
I didn't know there was such a thing until I started reading people's samples. There are 2 things I didn't know until I got to The Sopranos. One of them was David Chase would say, write on the script, go deeper. I didn't know what that meant. And I didn't know what this concept of voice is. And part of me always wanted to have an identifiable style, because I like the way certain people write. I mean, we all are interested in, like, Patty Chayefsky or David Mamet. And you see that kind of unrealistic, whatever, that elevated style it's poetic and it's beautiful and it's exciting. And I know Aaron Sorkin is an admirer of that can do that. And I always sort of thought, I want to have that. But I actually think I don't really, when I read somebody's script, if I'd say they have a voice, I would say it's literally, is there anything in it where they are confident enough to know that what they say has some value, and to assert in whatever way is organic to what they're doing, that becomes a voice to me. So that I can't like pick up a script and say, oh, this is so David Chase. Sometimes I can, because it's, you know, when I watch an old Rockford Files, I've said to David, I go, oh, you had this thing in there and stuff like that. And he'll be like, oh, that was Stephen Cannell's. Like my concept of what the voice is really, I don't know if that's not something like auteur theory, that's basically a commercialization of writing so that we can keep working. Oh, give it a whatever, a Terence Winter feel. The writers that I admire don't really have a style. They might have a subject matter that they stick near, and at times that's also dictated by the marketplace.
People are told, find your voice. Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
How are you supposed to do that?
Well, so much of what we do is mimicry in series TV. You know, the job was to come in and not find my voice, was to find David's voice. You know, give
that's kind of the
David
job.
back,
Yeah, right.
yeah, give David back something that reads like his show. You know, and as a showrunner, you know, it was astounding to me. Sometimes we would get, you know, try to bring on a new writer, you know, deep into the series, say on Boardwalk Empire season 3 or 4, and you get people turning in drafts of the show and say, God, this sounds nothing like the characters on the show. You've had 48 hours of the show to watch and listen to. Nucky doesn't sound like this. This is not.
I have never wanted to see samples that were based on the show that I was working on. I always wanted to say the thing you wrote that you like best, because you turn in Boardwalk Empire, it's going to suck. I mean, the chances are 9 times out of 10, it's going to really not be. It's so easy to go, well, he wouldn't say that. Well, that's not the right thing. You know, it's just not good.
But it's, you know, I found that too. You know, for a while I said I didn't want to see specs of my own show. I want to see original material. But then you'd be impressed with the original material and then realize, but they don't understand how to write your show. So I felt like I needed to see both. Do you understand? Have you studied the show you're about to write for? Do you understand the difference between the way Jerry and Kramer speak? And if you can do that and show me you can do that, then we're probably in better shape. I mean, because it especially, you know, if you've got dozens of hours of material to mimic and to get those voices in your head, you know, you should be able to at least know the basic tone of how these people sound.
Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, you take it for granted that people can, you know, that is a very special skill, being able to write in someone else's voice and hear characters the way they are and get it right, and not turn in a script that says, you know, your Soprano script and have Tony say, forget about it, or something that's going to irritate people, or not, you know, have Roger say, hey, Red to Joan every single time, or, you know, start every scene with, oh, there he is. You know, there's certain things where you're like, look at him.
I haven't seen that reaction.
I know.
Work, yeah. But yeah, so that you get it.
There it is.
Yeah, I think, you know, nobody's going to like this. And I don't know that I'm right, and who knows, but I don't know that you can create a voice. I think it's like, you know, hitting a 300 game. Some people can do it and some people can't do it. They just don't get born with it, or as far as a voice goes. You have a bunch of attitudes that you grew up, attitudes, thoughts, information, blah, 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 you were given, and you're lucky if you have one.
When you're writing original,
Nobody's going to like it. Jesus.
What?
Fair enough, David. When you're writing original material, who is your quality control? Who has the nerve to say to you, it's not good, not there yet?
If you're writing it yourself, you mean, and you're on a
You're writing
show,
original. Who in your life tells you the truth about whether it's good or not?
it's pretty hard, I think, to get the truth.
You never seemed like it was hard for you to give us the truth.
Yeah, I don't know.
You made it look pretty easy.
Yeah, but well, never mind.
Yeah, I mean, this is a very good beginning writer thing, and it goes on for the rest of your life. Who you share your work with is really, really hard to figure out. And you do want the truth, but you don't want the truth. Everyone has an agenda. They have to know, are you really finished? Do you really want notes? Are you pleasing someone else when you're doing it? Did you write it for, you know, an actor or something like that? There's so many elements in it, but the fact is that you have no idea. And one of the great luxuries of being a showrunner is doing a draft of a script and bringing it in and giving it to the room. And we had a thing on Mad Men where they would give the notes on the script and I would not be in the room, and they would be done anonymously. And the writer's assistant would write down all of people's comments and notes on the draft. And then I would be alone with the writer's assistant at the end of the day doing the notes on it and be like, well, who said this? And they'd be like, I can't tell you that. And I was like, oh, they didn't like that, huh? They didn't like that. And by the way, there are never any
It's a
compliments.
really good idea.
It was great, and it kept me from, honestly, a lot of times it was really hard because you'd see 12 people that you respected, you know, including our consultants and everything, just cut the thing that you thought was the best thing in the script. And by the way, and then you look at the show, and if you do keep those things in, sometimes if I see the show again, or even at that time, my greatest victories were proving the people who were helping me wrong. You get in this weird dynamic where you're like, these people are helping you so much. There are so many things that would have been terrible if left to my own instincts. And I just can't tell. So, you know, I have to say also, I mean, in real life, you have to find those people and you have to be really careful because the wrong person can really take the wind out of your sails and destroy something for a very long time. If you respect them and they don't like it, you don't have enough defiance in your heart to fix things sometimes.
You know, it's a funny thing now that we're talking about it, because like the Rockford Files was a big show. It was like my first big show that I worked on. And it was just, there was no, in those days, there weren't writers' rooms. There was just me, Stephen Cannell first, Juanita Bartlett, and me. And you also, the Writers Guild had a rule that you had to do 2 episodes. You had to give 2 episodes to what were called outside writers or freelance writers. They couldn't all be staff written. So there's just the 3 of us. And for some reason, that was much easier to be honest. I mean, we would sit in a room and say, you know, this isn't working. And, I would tell Steve that, and he would tell, and it was different than it is now.
Do you like the room?
Huh?
Do you like the writer's room?
Oh, yeah. Well, it depends.
Some of the best times of my life have been in writers' rooms. Sopranos certainly the gold standard. I mean, we had such a great time. I mean, it was hard work, but we laughed every day, and it was such a fun, interesting environment. I mean, it was great. And I think I ate minestrone soup every day for lunch for a year and a half. And I still think about that soup.
Oh,
what was that restaurant we used to order?
Piccolo Venezia.
Piccolo Venezia.
Give a shout out to them.
Got the same thing, minestrone soup and half a loaf of Italian bread. It was great.
You know, I remember you telling me a story about Boardwalk, that you were in the middle of, you know, things weren't happening. You were in the room and you were struggling with the story and nothing was going on, and you had to leave. And you came back and you said, so you guys take it from here. And you came back 2 hours later and it said on the board, Nucky is Lear. That's all it said. For all afternoon.
And Terry, what was your reaction to that?
I honestly don't remember that, and I'm sure it happened, but I'm sure I wasn't happy about it. I was like, that's 2 hours of the brain trust, you know, working on the story. Nucky is Lear.
Wow.
Yeah.
I hate to speak out of school here, but I do remember David leaving, and Terry, you and I think it might have been Andy and Diane, just saying like, well, what's he want us to do? And I remember these are all, you know, professional writers, I was like, well, there better be something on there. But he's not going to like it no matter what, because he's in a mood and he has an idea that he wants to do it. He's just got to come around to it. But we have to put something up there. I remember like pitching stuff that and stuff that was so bad it wasn't even bad enough to put on the board.
Wow.
Tony is Lear, I think, got up there.
Tony is Lear was one of the things, or
Norman
I
Lear.
remember when I worked on the Rocky Show, when I worked on the show, the year before I came on, there had been somebody else there in that role, producer. And they used to be, you know, they'd have these meetings, the three of them, and this guy used to go like, "What if?" Now, that's all he
Yeah, just anything to give the illusion of you're participating.
works going on.
oh,
Repeat
I worked
something
with
somebody
someone.
else said.
I worked with someone that we called the Echo, and this person, I will not even say their gender or anything to identify them or where it was, but the boss would say something, and they would repeat the last 3 words of what the boss was saying while they were saying it.
It's like
And
good.
the boss would be like, exactly.
Yeah,
Sometimes the writer's room is terrifying, but I did have, if you do get to run a room, you will have access to other showrunners. I mean, you have anyway, I guess, but when you don't need a job, everyone sort of opens up to you about their process. And if you have a job, let's put it that way. And I remember someone saying to me, I was like, I don't know how to do this. I mean, Genji Cohan has been a friend of mine forever, and she's an incredible showrunner and has run a bunch of shows and worked for a bunch of people and gave me a lot of advice, but the ending of which was, you're going to find your own way to do this. But don't forget, the room is there. Everyone is there to help you. And at a certain point, you're going to go in there and you're going to be disgusted that no one can fix your problem, which is the problem of the show. But you have to use that. And the problem with it is that you're in a constant state of criticism with each other, of their ideas, of your ideas, and you really have to have an open, safe environment. But it doesn't have to be warm. And that's the funny thing is you get notes on your script if you're on staff and the showrunner gives you notes. It's immediately personal. It can't help because you wrote it. I was going to do this. I was going to do that. Oh, that's my mother. Oh, that what else it is. Whatever it is, the thing that you're writing, every criticism feels like failure. And sometimes it's public. And I tried to have some understanding of that, but I was very frustrated for a long time until I was like, wait a minute. This is, and Genji was really the person who told me, she's like, that room is there to help you. You want to go into that room and you want to smile. You want to go into that room and say, what have you got for me? If you're not in there all the time. And I have to say some of the best things that people love about Mad Men. I walked into the room and they had to be explained to me like 20 times because I wasn't there when they were working them out. Lane's Jaguar not starting in the garage when he was trying to commit suicide. Like they explained that to me and I just started laughing like, oh my God, I can't believe somebody thought of this. It's so much more than you think. But it's really hard to utilize it and really hard to harness it because you're in your own head.
Gentlemen, we're at our point, but I think the dice are hot with you guys. Can we go a little bit longer?
Well, I'm super busy.
Yeah, me too. Me too.
I have a pickup basketball game that I have to get to.
All right, we'll go 10 minutes longer. Can you guys do that?
Sure. I have to delay
I can.
cocktail hour to 1:15 now. Okay.
I'll buy you all drinks.
Okay.
I already pressed the button on the microwave. I don't know.
Since you're all being so honest, in the course of your shows you worked on, have you ever shit the bed on a script? Have you ever just whiffed one?
Oh yeah.
Say that again?
Have you ever just whiffed a script? You just shit the bed, as it were. You just got it wrong.
I whiffed one. I wrote the only script that was thrown out in The Sopranos. I can tell you that. That's not public knowledge.
That's true?
Say some more.
I wrote a script on The Sopranos that we threw out.
No, we only threw out one script. The hospital thing, remember that? It preceded some unpleasant events. We never threw a script.
I don't remember that
Yeah.
either, Matt.
I'm going to remind you guys.
Okay.
It was a script that it was written during the summer, and it was about Tony hires Karen Young, the FBI agent, to be his assistant.
Yeah. Did we actually wrote that?
Oh yeah, I wrote the whole thing. So yes, at least for me.
And what does it feel like? What
Honestly, it wasn't a big deal. Wasn't a big deal at all. I'm pleased. Shame. I was so ashamed.
That's gotta hurt.
It's, I've certainly written a ton of stuff that has gotten thrown out, on my own shows, that it's just not working. And I think I probably threw it out before I even got to the end of a full script, knowing that I'm just going down the wrong path, and this is just not, I can make that determination myself, or, in the case of Boardwalk Empire, Howard Corder, Tim Van Patten could reaffirm my own suspicions that what I had was a pile of shit, and let's forget that. It's just not happening. That's part of the job, though. You're not gonna bat 1,000, and you're not even gonna bat 500. So it's you can't take it. You can't let it break your spirit. I mean, it's you try
really
things.
hard to throw a script away, though.
It is, yeah. And honestly, on Sopranos, we
won't hang on to anything,
I always say nothing went to waste on Sopranos more than any other show I've worked on. We made soup out of everything. There's a little thing here. It all ended up somewhere. And by the end of it, I think we had a thing on the wall of story ideas, and we went things we wanted to get to. And there were only a couple of things we never got to, little notions that always ended up somewhere. But because it's hard to think of stories and it's hard to execute them. So you just want to use anything you can.
60 pages, and now it's 3 weeks later. It's like, we got to make this work,
Yeah.
Yeah. And sometimes you find yourself trying to, I throw away a lot of things on Mad Men, but we almost always tried to figure out how to do it. And then we continue that tradition, Terry, of the list, David, of the list of story ideas that would get, that we wanted to get to, that we wanted to do.
Yeah.
And like on The Sopranos, we put it behind a pillar so that if people walked into the writer's room, they wouldn't see it.
Right.
And I do believe that one of the actors, I do think, again, it was Rich Sommer, heard about it and came in, or maybe it was the cards on the board, but we had a card that said Harry's funeral. So he would always come in and be like, what is that? I was like, don't look at that. You don't need to look at that.
That's great.
Last couple of questions. And when I do panels, or if I'm talking to young writers, they will often say, this is the first or second thing I've ever written. How can I sell it? How can I sell that? Can you talk about the real life odds of selling your first or second thing?
I have no idea. I mean,
You mean like a writing sample?
That they're written their first or second pilot, and they will say, I want to run this show, or I want to sell this show. What are the real life odds of that?
Well, it changes all the time. I think it was really good for like the last 2 years. And now that there's only 5 companies, it's going to be not as good. There's going to be a lot of consolidation and less jobs, and they figured out how to get us to do 6 episodes of something or whatever. I don't know. Mad Men was the first pilot I'd written, but I had been working for a while, and I'd also written a lot of spec scripts. That is, scripts of existing shows that I made up. I had to make up the whole story as writing samples. But I don't know. It took 7 years to get Mad Men made, so I don't know that the odds are very good if you don't stick with it.
Up until that happened, the wisdom was you couldn't write a spec pilot. That was absurd.
Yeah.
You don't write spec pilots. You work on a show for a million years, and eventually, once you've risen up the ranks, you'll have a meeting with a the company that employs you, and you'll pitch them ideas, and maybe you'll go off and write a pilot. That was the prevailing wisdom for my first 10 to 12 years in the business. And then Matt came along, and then suddenly like, oh yeah, well, I guess you can do that. And then there was, many people who did the same thing. It happens. It's obviously, if you're new, very hard to get a company that's going to let you. It's like walking into General Motors and saying, I have an idea for a car. Oh, great, here's $100 million. Why don't you go build it? It's like, well, have you designed cars before? No. Have you run an assembly line? No. Well, maybe if your design is really great, we'll hook you up with somebody who's already done that, and you're lucky enough to maybe get a show sold on the air. The odds are probably akin to being eaten by a shark, in that zone, whatever that is, 1,000,000 to 1. But it does happen, and certainly doesn't mean you shouldn't try. But probably easier to aspire to getting a job on a staff first, if that's possible.
It's like playing darts. Like what's the odds of getting a perfect, right in the middle bullseye?
Also, not only does the script have to be good, somebody's got to read it. Then this used to crush me, because I'd say, okay, I'm writing this script. It has to be good. I have to get it to somebody who reads it, pays attention long enough to actually read it. And again, this is coming in for a new writer who they don't know, so they have to take time out of the day to read it, focus, like it, and then do something about it, and also be in the position to make something happen. So the odds of all of those things going right at the same time are so daunting that you think, wow, why does anybody even do this? Because literally 15 things have to go right at precisely the same time, ending with, they're going to give me money. And it's
the
like,
hardest thing for me was getting my agent at the time to read it.
Yeah, exactly.
I remember saying, like, I wrote this thing, and he's like, well, I'm gonna, you're right, I should get to it. Because they knew, like, I was nobody, and what are they going to do with this? And, like, they're going to try and get me a whatever the prevailing wisdom is. I do have to say, though, even it is never a bad idea to write a spec piece of material, because eventually you could sell it down the road if you were in a position of success. You can pull the things out of the drawer, as Rod Serling said that he wrote spec stuff and sent it out and got it rejected for like 7 years, and he would just take it and put it in a drawer, and take it and put it in a drawer. And then one day he sold something, and all he did was take stuff out of the drawer for like 5 years. And that's possible. But I also think that it's a much better policy than what I hear most of the time is people going in and selling pitches. And it may be because I'm terrible at pitching that I've always written everything on spec. But the idea that you're going to go in and sell a pitch for an idea, and that's your commitment to your career, and what are the odds of that? I guess it happens, but if you want a job working for anyone who's running a show, your pitch is useless. It's basically like, it's, as they say, I mean, I pitched Mad Men a few times. That's why I wrote it on spec, is I would pitch it and they would just look at me and say, like, this is execution dependent. And I was like, right. So I'll write it, and I'll show you that I can fly, and then you'll see if you want to take my Cessna to land at your airport.
Well, also, we should remember that the experience of writing the script, creating something, is supposed to be positive for its own intrinsic value.
The sheer joy of it.
What?
The sheer joy of it.
The more if you write 3 spec scripts, especially if you come up with your own stories, that is the equivalent of working in a writer's room for a year, easy. In fact, it might be the best education you can have, even if it's fully imitational. You will get better every time you write a piece of material. David's right. It's completely psychodegradable. It is absolutely useful to you as a writer to keep writing things.
Right.
Just the fact that you got to the end is amazing.
Yeah.
It's a miracle.
People give me scripts, they say this is the first script I've ever written. And the first thing I say generally is, I don't even have to read it, and I want to say congratulations. The fact that you sat in a room and aside from doing any other number of things you could have been doing, and you typed for however long it took you to type this, good for you. There's not a lot of people who have the discipline to go and keep going and keep going. just the fact that you got it on 120 pages or 60 pages, whatever it is says something about you. Now let's see if you have any talent, and probably you don't, because unless you're the one person in the world who got it right the very first time, that's probably not going to happen. But you will get better and better and better with each script you write. You have to. If you don't, something's wrong. But it's like doing anything else.
I mean, there are the Soderbergh things of writing that script in 8 days, across the Volkswagen.
Sure.
I'm going to sum all of this up by saying, I think what you're saying is keep writing and wash your hands.
Yeah.
That's right.
Thank you so much, gentlemen.
Wash your hands before and after writing, definitely.
Yes.
Okay.
Wash your hands, keep writing. Happy Passover to everybody that observes. Gentlemen, thank you so much for this. It's been an education.
Thank you. It was a real pleasure.
Thanks so much, Lawrence.
Thank you.
Till next
Thanks,
time.
Gary.
Good seeing you guys. Thanks, Matt. Thanks, David. I'll see you guys
Bye,
soon.
everybody. Thanks, David.